Can we talk about how Patricia was trying to explain everything happening on the island to the sheriff? And the sheriff basically said, I don't want to hear the other half of the story. Then he tells her, do me a favor, give the mayor my 2 weeks notice and feel free to help yourself out. I laughed so damn hard at this scene. The man basically said, good luck to all of you. Honestly, I don't blame him. This episode contains spoilers, so if you enjoyed these deep dives, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe. Tom wakes up from what is basically a long summer nap, brought on by a heavy dose of island mushrooms. Patricia calls him and casually informs him that he has been asleep for an entire day, with his face on a toilet seat, no less. Then she tells him to meet her and Wick at the Historical Society building, which also happens to be the former home of Richard and Sarah Warren. And that's where things immediately gets insane. Patricia casually reveals that while Tom was unconscious, they dug up Richard Warren's body and he's still alive. Not only is he alive, but apparently he's upstairs waiting to speak with Tom because Tom is technically in charge of the island that Richard once protected more than 400 years ago. That's a lot to process, especially after a 24-hour mushroom trip. When Tom tries to touch Richard's pendant, Wick and Patricia immediately stopped him. Apparently, Wick tried the same thing before and injured his hand. Meanwhile, Richard Warren is now sitting inside the very building that used to be his home centuries ago. The episode balanced horror and comedy perfectly through small moments, like Tom jumping when Richard suddenly speaks, Patricia barging into the room because she forgot her purse, and Tom realized that Patricia has already started wondering if the undead Richard somehow holds a grudge against her. Then comes one of the most disturbing reveals in the episode. Richard explained that the vial contains the covenant he made with the island's hunger demon, a pact signed in his own blood, feces, and semen. The moment Tom hears that, he immediately puts it down. I would have done the exact same thing because what the hell? Speaking of Patricia, everything she does in this episode is hilarious. The way she says, how sad, and then immediately follows with a shock oh after Richard tries to gouge out the eyes of Sarah Warren's statue. Then she steals the sheriff's jeep and confidently says, I got this. No, Patricia, you absolutely do not got this. Richard finally explains how the curse began, or at least his version of it. His voice sounds like it's coming from the deepest pit of hell, like the audio settings are set to maximum bass with no treble whatsoever. When Tom asks how he's still alive, Richard replies, I was tricked by the devil and betrayed by my leaders, but an evil power sustains me. So yes, Richard basically confirms that he made a deal with the devil out of desperation. According to him, the first settlers were starving so badly that they were eating dirt and even corpse. Then Richard discovered the mushrooms, consumed one, and that's when something else came to him. When Tom asks what that thing was, Richard remains frustratingly vague. A demon, the island itself. Whatever this entity was, it offered Richard a covenant that would save the settlement. But when Tom asks what Richard gave in return, Richard dodges the question and simply says, if I had refused, none of you would be here. Then Tom tells Richard that he believes the same entity may have spoken to him. Tom asks, what did it want? And Richard responds with a line that may explain the entire island. It knows frightened men would do desperate things. Richard asks to see his children's belongings, and one item immediately stood out to me, the cloth doll that Francis had. What's interesting is that we never seen the brooch Sarah gave to Francis, so where did it go? Now, the name Francis means free one, and I don't think that's a coincidence. Back in episode 6, Francis mentions that a wagon wheel took her right finger. Shortly after Sarah places a brooch on her doll, that detail may seem small, but I think it could be more important later. While researching, I came across the real historical figures, both of whom were accused during the Salem Witch Trials. Frances was a wealthy widow who managed her husband's affair after his death. She was arrested arrested in 1692 and later released after her son posted a large bond. Ruth was also accused, although records regarding her release remain unclear. Now, am I saying these characters are direct references? Not necessary, but I do think the show may be drawing inspiration from these historical events. In fact, I believe there may be 2 surviving bloodlines connected to Richard's family, and not just one. I know what you're thinking. At the end of the painting showing one child swimming back toward the island while the others sail away. And you're right, but we also can't ignore Patricia. The island has repeated pushed Patricia toward witchcraft, rituals, and strange behavior. Around the same period in history, 2 major fears dominate society. People believe others were making deals with the devil, and the Salem Witch Trials were spreading throughout New England. Richard may have sold his soul to the devil. Meanwhile, the witch trials were happening in the background. The show hasn't directly shown us those events yet, but I think we've already seen the modern day echoes of them through Patricia. At this point, it's pretty safe to assume that Richard's event involved human sacrifice. The island is starving and apparently it needs to be fed. Richard then reveals what he believes is the only way to break the curse, because he's the last surviving member of his bloodline. He thinks if they take him far enough out to sea, beyond the point where sailors fear, the curse will finally break, allowing him to age normally and die. So Wick takes Tom and Richard out on his boat toward the Pacific location. According to Wick, if they travel any further, people born on Widow's Bay may never make it back alive. The makeup effects on Richard are incredible. Honestly, he looks like something straight out of Robert Eggers' Nosferatu. Every close-up sells the idea this man has been trapped between life and death for centuries, and Wick knows firsthand that the island is capable of. In a speech that feels very similar to Quint's famous USS Indianapolis monologue from Jaws, Wick tells the story of sneaking out with his friends as a teenager to test the supposedly cursed waters surrounding the island. That night, his best friend Mark drowned. According to Wick, some kind of tentacle creature attacked their boat as he tried to swim away, and he felt something grabbing his leg. He kicked it loose only to realize it was Mark desperately holding on to him during his final moments. That tragedy explains so much about Wick's character. It also explains Jerry's obsession with the island's history. It's easier to believe her brother was taken by a supernatural force than to accept that his death may have been a tragic accident. There's a lot more going on beneath the surface with Jerry than most people realize. Then, just as Wick predicted, Richard suddenly changes his mind and decided he wants to live after all. Eventually, Tom and Wick manage to force Richard back into the coffin. During the struggle, Wick is thrown aboard and briefly disappears into the ocean with only a life preserver keeping him afloat. For a moment, I genuinely thought he was gone. Thankfully, he makes it back to the boat. Then comes the big moment. Tom opens the coffin and finds that Richard has finally been reduced to nothing but bones and ash. Now, personally, I would have felt a lot better if we had actually seen Tom throwing the coffin into the ocean, but that's just me. But this is Widow's Bay and ever seems to stay dead. And that's why I don't believe Richard's death completely lifted the curse. First of all, we still have episodes left. Second, why all of the Richard and Wick and Tom drama is unfolding. Evan and Kelly having a storyline that may be even more important. The two begin talking about Tom. Kelly suggests that going through some of Tom's belongings to find answers. Before they do, they were watching what appears to be the 1960 horror film called The City of the Dead, also known as Horror Hotel. And of course, I had to look up the reference. The movie takes place in a town where a witch was burned at the stake during the 1600s before dying. She and her followers sold their souls to Satan in exchange for eternal life. The only requirement was that they continue offering human sacrifice every year to keep the curse alive. Sounds familiar? Because that sounds a lot like everything we've been hearing about Widow's Bay. Even stranger, some of the characters' names are surprisingly similar, including Richard and Patricia. Now, back to the episode. While searching through Tom's belongings, Kelly discovers a sealed box. After opening with a paperclip, they found a collection of photographs. At first, nothing seems unusual. There are photos of Lauren while she was pregnant and pictures of her before Evan was born. But then everything changes. Evan noticed photos showing Lauren holding him after his birth. There are even pictures of her spending time with him when he looks 2 or 3 years old. And that's impossible because Tom told Evan his mother died during childbirth. Kelly immediately points out the obvious. If Lauren died giving childbirth, then how is she alive in these pictures years later? Evan doesn't have an answer, and honestly, neither do we. That revelation changes everything we thought we know. At this point, I'm starting to wonder if Lauren is still alive somewhere on the island. Hell, I believe she is alive on the island. Maybe she is connected to that abandoned hospital everyone seems determined to avoid. Maybe she's been hidden away this entire time. And judging by the look on Evan's face at the end of the episode, he's starting to ask the same questions. He's angry, he's confused, and for the first time, he's beginning to realize that his father has been lying to him. The episode closes with another interesting detail. A guest storms out of the inn screaming that Kurt smells like a cabbage, took a shit in a baby diaper. Kurt don't give a damn no more, okay? And while that hilarious moment is happening, the camera slowly zooms in on the painting showing Sarah Warren and her children leaving the island. If that painting is accurate, then it means at least one of Richard's children may have returned to Widow's Bay. And if that's true, then Richard's bloodline never ended. My guess, the child was Frances. If Frances survived, married, had children of her own, then Richard's descendants could still be living on the island today. Which brings me back to Lauren. What if Lauren is one of Richard's descendants? And if that's the case, then Evan is too. That would completely change Richard's theory about ending the curse by eliminating his bloodline. Because if Evan carries that bloodline, then the curse isn't over. It's still alive. The question is, what happens when the island realizes it? And more importantly, what is Tom willing to do if saving the island means sacrificing the people he loves most? That's what makes the ending so terrifying, because the real battle may not be against monsters, curses, or ancient pacts. It may be between a father and his son. And honestly, I don't think either of them is ready for what's coming next. Now, I know I probably missed a few clues and Easter eggs. My brain is overflowing with all these hidden meanings, theories, and connections in this show. Let me know your theories in the comments below. I love reading them, and some of you catch things I completely miss. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.